Thank you.
Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you very much, Matt. A couple of questions. It's very nice to hear State Department talk about the political violence. Last week in Pakistan, similar comment you had made was taken out of perspective a little bit because President Trump has been shot as well and Imran Khan was shot as well. But over there, the reaction was not the way it is in the US. So my first question is that Supreme Court of Pakistan, most of the judges favored Imran Khan. The guy was shot. Political violence in the US, all 1,000 people, 600 pleaded guilty, 400 were charged, punishment was given. Foreign minister is charged today in the similar violence that happened in Pakistan a year or 2 years, more than a year after the political violence happened over there, and he's charged today. The political party is being banned of Imran Khan. Today, the government has decided that. Your entire Congress has decided to rule in that favor. And I have been asking you these things for a year and a half, these same questions. But over there, you are not making the comments that you make here for democracy, political. Why is that?
So I guess I'm missing what the actual question was
So the question
here.
is that with an ally like Pakistan, why do you not have the same feelings of either political violence or democracy or the rule of law?
So I think you have missed the very many times I have addressed this exact question from this podium, where I have said, of course, we abhor political violence in any country, including Pakistan, and have spoke out against it and condemned it. And we support the rule of law in Pakistan and every country in the world. And we want to see respect for democratic principles and people's fundamental human rights and democratic rights upheld. That's true in Pakistan. It's true everywhere in the world. That's been something I've spoken to many times. So I think the premise of the question with respect is wrong. Go ahead.
So just one more
Come to you next, Ryan.
question. Matt, just one more, please.
Yeah, go ahead.
In Pakistan, there was a funeral procession of an Afghan poet. He was killed in Islamabad. In Pakistan, you know, there's 1 million Afghans. I've always spoken in the favor of Afghans. But last week, what I saw, and there are 50,000 Afghans, with the US wants to pull out as well. There was a funeral procession from Islamabad to his native village in Waziristan. And the entire way, thousands of Afghans were holding Afghanistan flags, chanting against the serving military, political, every leadership you can imagine. And then people from Voice of America, staff members of Voice of America were spreading that on the social media. So two related questions. Would you be in the favor of Pakistan taking some stern actions against those Afghans, whether it's deportation or, and if you would be interested in moving these 50,000 Afghans with the US wants from Pakistan? And lastly, Voice of America is a state-run entity. I do not understand how they take interest in local politics.
So I will just say, with respect to the specific incident to which you're referring, I'm not aware of it, so I can't possibly comment on it. Ryan, go ahead.
Wait a second. You're going to let that stand? Voice of America is a state-run organization?
I've already noted that I disagreed with the number of the premises. They are funded by the United States, but of course they have
by the U.S. Congress.
The U.S. Congress, but they have complete editorial independence.
Question on the point that he was making, that the Pakistan Supreme Court did recently rule that about 20 seats or so ought to be delivered to the PTI. The government then responded by banning Imran Khan's party rather than kind of moving in the direction that the court was acknowledging. So in the past, the State Department has said this is a matter for the Pakistani courts to work out. Is it still a matter for the Pakistani courts? You disagree with the government's intervention there?
So I'll say that we saw those public statements from the government. Our understanding is this is the beginning of what will be a complex political process, but certainly banning a political concern is something, or a political party is something that would be of great concern to us.
Right. Quick follow-up on Cuba. Yeah. We've talked to some Cuban business owners in the wake of the State Department moving them off of the list of people who are not helpful what is it? The list was states that are not helpful in combating terrorism. They were removed from that. The business owners in Cuba are saying that because Cuba is still on the state sponsor of terrorism list, that it's harder for them to do business with European countries, with other Latin American countries, than it was even during the Trump administration. Is the State Department still looking at this before the end of Biden's first term?
I just don't have any updates on that process. Sorry. Yeah, Alex, go ahead.
Thank you, Matt. Two topics. Ukraine. There are reports that Ukrainian leaders walked away frustrated the summit. after the U.S. Refused the latest request in terms of launching using American weapons to strike inside Russia. Why would the United States not allow them to hit back inside Russia? They believe that striking those launches would help them save lives in the first place.
So first of all, I don't know what reports you're referring to, but I will say that we had incredibly productive discussions with President Zelensky and with other members of the Ukrainian government when they were here last week for the Washington summit. And as part of those discussions, we talked about NATO's irreversible path to NATO, and Ukraine's irreversible path to NATO and the progress that they are making along that path. We talked about the delivery of F-16s to Ukraine, which is underway. We talked about the fact that we are providing them additional air defense systems, something that President Zelensky had specifically asked for, and that we were able to do both from our own stocks and from marshaling the coalition that we have assembled all around the world. With respect to the question, the president actually got this question at his press conference last week and spoke to it quite directly. We have allowed Ukraine to use American-made weapons, American-provided weapons, to strike just across the border where they are taking incoming fire from Russia, but we have decided at this point not to expand beyond that. But that said, you just look at the actions I outlined a moment ago that we took last week, and add those to the actions we have taken for the past 2+ years to support the defense of Ukraine. And I think the suggestion that we are somehow not committed to Ukraine's defense is in every way belied by the actual facts and our actual record.
When the president was asked about that, his response was about the capabilities to strike Moscow. That's not what we're talking about. The question is, why not allow them to strike launch sites?
We have decided that that is not an appropriate step for the United States to take now at this time. But that doesn't change the fact that we have provided Ukraine with significant capabilities to launch attacks against the Russian troops that are that continue their aggression against Ukraine, that we have provided them with the ability to strike across the border, and of course that we have provided them significant air defenses, which really is what we're talking about here. When you have this question about strikes inside Russia, a lot of it relates to Russia's ability to launch assaults that then, missiles and other weapons, drones and other things that then land inside Ukraine. So we have provided them with air defenses to help repel those attacks, and that's what we'll continue to do.
Okay, my second topic on Azerbaijan and Armenia, the Secretary hosted the meeting says, beyond your readout, could you help us understand if there was any progress noted at all?
So I don't want to give any more detail beyond the readout, other than to say, and you heard the Secretary say this at the opening of the meeting in his public comments. In fact, I think I saw you standing outside the room before those comments, so I know you were there, is that the two parties have made incredible progress, and they have come a long way. And so what we continue to do is push them. A peace agreement between those two countries would mean so much for those countries, and it would mean so much for the region, for peace, stability, for security in the region. We do think a deal is possible, but it requires both sides to make some difficult choices and tough compromises. And so what we're going to do is continue to push them to resolve those final differences and reach an agreement.
Have you succeeded at all in Washington? The Secretary's comments came before.
We have made progress. I'm not going to speak to it in detail, but we don't have an agreement yet, and we're not going to rest until we reach one.
Thank you.
Coming back to Ukraine, the President Zelensky, after returning, has talked about the potential of a second peace summit, and this time Russia would be invited. Is that something that was sort of encouraged by U.S. officials while he was here? He said it just after getting back.
It's something that we discussed with them, but as we have said before, any decisions around diplomatic negotiations are decisions that Ukraine has to make, not the United States, not any other country that's not party to this conflict. Ukraine is the victim here. It's Ukraine that has seen their country invaded, has seen their civilians killed, has seen significant parts of their country occupied. And so it's for Ukraine to decide when and how and in what shape to undertake diplomatic negotiations. As their partner, as their backer, we will support them if that's the path that they choose to take. We have always made that clear. And I will note, and this kind of goes to how the Kremlin has responded, at least initially, to those statements from Ukraine. We've always supported diplomacy when Ukraine is ready, but it has never been clear that the Kremlin is ready for actual diplomacy. That was clear at the beginning of this war when we were pursuing diplomacy, and the Kremlin pulled a plug on diplomacy and invaded. and it seems to remain true today, but we will continue to stand with Ukraine, and if and when they believe further diplomatic steps are with Russia are appropriate, we will support them in that decision.
But that is a change. That previously they held a peace conference and didn't invite Russia. So doesn't that show an unwillingness from the Ukrainians to engage in sort of, you might not agree on everything,
Well,
but you could at least bring them to the table.
So I guess correct, but the difference is there's just a fundamental difference between Ukraine and Russia in this conflict, in that one is the aggressor, one's the victim. And so we do look at the victim differently than the aggressor, right? It's just a fundamental fact of this conflict, that it was Russia that launched this war, Russia that is occupying Ukraine, Russia that continues to launch assaults, Russia that could end the conflict today by withdrawing back to their borders. And so, of course, we look at them differently because one has the moral high ground and one does not. But our position with respect to negotiations hasn't changed, and that's if and when Ukraine is ready to pursue either direct negotiations or direct diplomacy or some other form of diplomacy, we will support them in that decision.
And from this administration's point of view, there's basically there's no point at which you would tell Ukraine that you need to come to the table now. That's never going to be. I guess I'm asking because depending on who might be the vice presidential pick for the Republican nominee, and things that the Republican nominee has spoken about Ukraine, it seems like there's a reasonable possibility, depending on which way you think the election's going to go, that early next year the situation's going to look quite different. So from the Ukrainians' point of view, do you think they might be responding to U.S. political realities by making this step?
I am not going to speculate or comment in any way on why the Ukrainians might be making that decision, other than to say that lots of times you hear people say, we want to see peace in Ukraine. Of course, we want to see peace too. We want it to be a just peace. Not just any peace, but a just peace and a lasting peace. And so we'll support Ukraine in the decisions that they make to try to achieve that just peace.
Can I follow up on
Yeah.
that? Obviously, he's talking about a summit, which we're talking about the month of November, so.
Is anything else happening then?
Exactly. But just to follow up on that, I mean, the new thing is that the Ukrainian president is saying the Russians should be at the table. So, I mean, the question, and which is different
Yeah.
from the summit in Geneva or next to Geneva or wherever. So, do you support that? Yes or no? I mean,
we support
So you
we
think
support
the
the government
Russians
of
should be at the
Ukraine and make it. So again, it is not a decision for us to make, right? That's I'm not trying to be cagey.
Granted.
It is a decision for. It has always been our view that decisions with respect to diplomacy around this conflict need to be decisions made by Ukraine, where Ukraine is in the driver's seat. And so if they want to invite Russia to that summit, of course that is something we support. That's a decision that they, as a direct party to this war, as the country that's seen their borders invaded, their people killed, they should make, and we will support them in it.
The Russians have always said that they actually support, and they were close, in fact, to reaching an agreement with Ukraine back in April 2022, that before Mr. Boris Johnson scuttled the whole deal. Do you have any comment on that? I mean, that was their position all along.
That is not the first unreliable is a generous way to put it. That is not the first statement we've heard out of the Russian government that does not comport with the actual facts.
Thank you, Matt. Tens of thousands of students have been protesting for last few days in Bangladesh, demanding the abolition of quotas in favor of a merit-based system for civil service jobs. The ruling party's wing, Bangladesh Chhatra League, has attacked the protesters, injured around 500 students just after the ruling prime ministers threatened the protesters. They also attacked the students, those who are entering the emergency room for their treatment. So what is your stance on these ongoing massive protests in Bangladesh?
So we are aware of and are monitoring reports of widespread student protests in Dhaka and around Bangladesh that have killed 2 and attacked and injured hundreds. The freedom of expression and peaceful assembly are essential building blocks of any thriving democracy, and we condemn any violence against peaceful protesters. Our thoughts are with those who have been impacted by this violence.
Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. a meeting was held a few days ago in Cairo regarding the arrangement of boarding between Egypt and Israel and the United States. While Egypt insists Israel to withdraw from Philadelphia corridor, Israel is stay there and control over this area. There is any new arrangement regarding this issue?
No new agreement, but it is something we are working on. Israel has very real security concerns about the Philadelphia corridor. That was a chief, if not primary, smuggling route for Hamas to get weapons into Gaza that they used to launch the attacks of October 7th, that they used to launch rocket attacks against Israel, that they used to oppress the Palestinian people. So it is important that that smuggling of weapons into Gaza be resolved. It's also important that we find a way to reopen the Rafah border crossing. So we have been in talks with Egypt and with Israel about how to accomplish all those objectives, but I don't have any announcements to make today with regards to any agreement. It's something that we're continuing to work on.
Okay. Next question, please. When will the United States condemn Israel targeting of civilians in Gaza, especially considering that U.S. administration is providing Israel with the weapons that killed the Palestinian civilian?
We are incredibly troubled by the ongoing deaths of Palestinians in Gaza. I've made that clear. I spoke to that earlier in the briefing in response to a question from one of your colleagues. Yes. As I said, it's an incredibly difficult situation. It remains an incredibly difficult situation. When you have not just Hamas militants, but if it turns out to be true that Mohammed Deif was actually hiding among civilians, one of the leaders, the number two in the leadership of Hamas in Gaza, was hiding among civilians in Gaza, it just shows the very difficult challenge that this war poses. Obviously, he is a legitimate military target. He has tremendous blood on his hands, including the blood of American citizens, I should remind everyone of. And so he is someone that Israel should be allowed to target and go after, but they have to do it in a way that minimizes, that prevents civilian casualties. And it's very difficult operating in this environment, but that doesn't in any way alleviate their responsibility to do so.
But is this justify to kill civilians, children?
There is no justification for the death of civilians. No, absolutely not. We don't want to see any civilians die. There is justification for strikes on military targets and militants, including the leadership of Hamas. And those are strikes that we support, but they need to be carried out in a way that, to the maximum, to the furthest extent possible, minimizes and prevents civilian harm. That is what we continue to press upon the government of Israel. As I said earlier, civilian casualties have come down fairly significantly from earlier in the war, but they still remain unacceptable. And that is why we continue to push for a ceasefire. It's why a ceasefire is so important, because then you wouldn't have kinetic activity inside Gaza that was leading to these civilian deaths day after day after day. You would have a pause in the conflict, a ceasefire that hopefully we could widen into an actual end to the war.
And also Israel needs strong words from the United States to condemn killed civilian, not only not allowed.
And I think I just made very clear that we are incredibly troubled by the deaths of civilians. And I can tell you, Secretary Blinken made that very clear in his meeting with senior Israeli officials earlier today.
But the United States wouldn't do something like this. I mean, there was time and time again that they actually held back striking, whether in Syria and Iraq, because some civilians were compromised. They have done that a number of times. So would the United States do what Israel just did?
I cannot speak to the exact circumstances about how targeting decisions are made. I spoke to the principles that we believe in and will continue to. Go ahead.
Sir, the Pakistani government has announced a ban on former Prime Minister Imran Khan's political party, Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf. The information minister says that Imran Khan and his political party involved in anti-state activities. You always talked about democratic values. What are your thoughts when you see such kind of undemocratic moves in a country like Pakistan.
I don't know if you walked in late, but I got this question about 10, 12 minutes ago from Ryan and spoke to it.
He was mixing up with many questions. So
What's that? Oh, well, it's okay if you were surfing your phone instead of listening to my answers. It's fine. I'm happy, always happy to repeat myself. What I said in response to Ryan's question is that no, we've seen the reports and the statements made by the government. Our understanding, this is the beginning of a complex process, but certainly the banning of a political party is something that would be of great concern to us.
I think Ryan also asked about the Supreme Court decisions. The State Department expressed concerns after the elections in Pakistan and asked for the investigations. So when Supreme Court now handed over these 20 seats to Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf, but this is something State Department was looking, that kind of investigation.
So as we've said, we support the peaceful upholding of constitutional and democratic principles, including respect for human rights and freedom of expression. We support democratic processes and broader principles, including the rule of law and equal justice under the law. And as those internal processes continue to play out, we will monitor these decisions and further decisions by the courts.
After Indian Prime Minister Modi visit to Moscow, both the countries decided to boost their trade relationships, and stats shows that last year the trade was $65 billion. President Zelensky, in his